Good day, class. You are welcome to another biology class by Mr. Judd at homeclass.com.ng. And in today's lesson, we are looking at living things and non-living things, which we can simply say we are looking at the characteristics of living things. My own name still remains Jagede Olushola Temitope, and in today, we shall see what living things are. At the end of today's lesson, each one of us should be able to define the term a living thing or organism, should be able to state the characteristics of living things, should be able to describe each characteristics of living organisms with examples. Then be able to differentiate between a living organism and non-living organism. Let's begin. What is a living thing? A living thing is organism in biology. When we refer to a living thing, we are looking at all the things that are alive, all the things that can carry out all life processes. They have ability to do all this on their own, not by any external forces. And what are these characteristics we are referring to? We are looking at the characteristics such as movement, respiration, excretion, growth, sensitivity, which in biology can also be known as irritability. All living things that can carry out reproduction, feeding, which can also be said to be nutrition in biology, and what we ask adaptation, competition, and lifespan. We are looking at non-living thing also. What can we regard as a non-living thing? We are looking at a non-living thing as a thing that do not have life in them and cannot carry out any of the characteristics of living things stated above. What are examples of living things? Examples of living things include Spirogyra. This is a plant-like organism that exists in a filamentous form. A liverwort. A liverwort is a small plant that does not have vascular bundle. It is under the division of Bryophyta. We are looking at amoeba too. Amoeba is an animal-like unicellular organism. We are looking at fern. A fern is a small vascular plant. It has vascular bundle or the trachea possessing plant. And what are examples of non-living things? We are looking at non-living things such as things that do not have life in them. We have enough, such as stone, water, pencil, cap, any other thing you can think of that you see not moving. Most objects around us that do not have life in them, we all can identify them. Okay, well, let's look at characteristics of living things. All these living organisms we have discussed or we are looking at, including us as human. What are those things that we all can do or we are capable of doing that anything that does not have a life in them cannot do? So we are looking at those features that differentiate a living thing from the non-living thing. And mind you, whatever we say under the characteristics of living things are equally what points you can use as differences between a living thing and a non-living thing. What is the first thing? I'll give you the acronym that you can use to remember all these characteristics. And as a student, you should not think that when they ask you characteristics of living thing, you don't state these acronyms as your characteristics. These are points that you use to explain the characteristics of living thing. And the acronym include Mr. Niger Lack. And the meaning of Mr. Niger Lack is that M represents movement, R represents reproduction, then the N represents nutrition, as well known as feeding, and I represent irritability, also known as sensitivity, and G represent the growth, and E represent excretion. R represent again respiration. You can interchange the R. You can call the first one respiration or you can call it reproduction. It doesn't have any particular order. Then the L represent lifespan. The A represents adaptation and C represent competition. As I mentioned earlier, these points are for you to remember how to differentiate, but they are actually not the way to write differences between them. In the course of the lesson, you will see what the differences between a living organism and non-living organism can be stated. We can also use the other way, which is Mrs. Green-Lack. Any of the two will still give you the stated characteristics of living thing. Let's go to the discussion of each characteristic. We are looking at movement and reproduction together. Now, the first one, I will discuss movement. What does movement mean in defining characteristics of living thing? We are saying that all living organisms have ability to change the position of either part of their body or the whole body from one place to another. As you can see, though plants do not change their position moving from one point to another like animals. That is one major thing that differentiates a plant from animal. Yet, plant exhibits certain movement. The first one you can see that's a plant called Mimosa pudica. Is a commonly known as touch and close plant. Most children play with this plant when they see it. When you touch the leaflets, the plant folds up, and as you see it in the diagram 1, the plant folds up as a result of touching it. That is an example of movement. Because you touch it and the plant folds up, it shows that the plant can move. Also, the other one you see as figure 2 is an example of movement in plant also, in which a plant that is exposed to a unilateral direction of light is responding to that direction of light, seeking a place where they can have access to light and photosynthesize. It means that plant is a living thing by responding to direction of light through their movement. So a plant is a living thing because it can respond, or it can move the part of their body. The final, or the number 3, which I'm showing on the plant, is a twisting of a plant, of plant tendril, climbing or coiling around a substance around it. It means that the plants can grow and move. As they are growing, they are moving in their body structure. Yet, they are not moving from one place to another, but they are showing a form of movement. So, the last one, which is animal, you can see animal is moving, running around, trying to get food. So, if we are asked, what are the reasons why living things move? Living things move in order to survive. Plant needs to get direction to where there is light. So, living things move in order to get a sex mate or a partner. Living things move in order to escape from danger. Those are the reasons why living organism can move if you are asked in exam point. That is few which I can mention under movement. The next one I will mention is reproduction. Reproduction simply means ability of living organisms to give rise to young ones of their kind. Now, when we say reproduction, we can say production of offsprings. If you look at, there are 2 types of reproduction in biology. I will just briefly describe them. The first one is asexual reproduction, and the second one is sexual reproduction. If you are talking about asexual reproduction, we are talking about a condition in which a parent, one single parent, involving no sex gametes and without any exchange of genetic gametic materials or coming together, a single parent produces offspring, which is exactly as that parent. For instance, amoeba as a unicellular cell will divide into 2, and that process of division in amoeba is known as binary fission. Take note of this as you see more of this on the course of doing biology, that when one parent gives rise to daughter cells or offspring, that is known as asexual reproduction. This can also be found in plants. If you cut the stem of certain plant, you can use it to produce a plant. But if you are using a seed is never a form of asexual reproduction, because a seed was formed by fusion of gametes to form zygote. That is all about asexual reproduction. You get to know that more under reproduction as a topic. Discussing the sexual reproduction involves 2 parents, and it involves exchange of sex gametes. Then, in the offspring produced by this cause, is never identical, or is not exactly identical as any of the parents. It combines the features of the 2 parents together. and as we have in human and most other organisms. Let's look at other characteristics of living thing. We have nutrition, which can also be said to be feeding, and irritability, which is also sensitivity. Nutrition simply means ability of organism to consume already made nutrients, as we can see in the case of animals or any other organism, or in the manufacture of its nutrient from simple inorganic materials in order to have energy to grow and repair its own worn out tissue. Now, what we are saying here is that some organisms can feed on ready-made food, and some can make their own food by combining simple inorganic material to have energy to grow. That's the basis. What is the basis for nutrition? Why do living organisms feed? In order to grow, in order to have energy, and to repair worn out tissue. As in the case of plants, they are the ones that can manufacture their food, and we refer to such feeding as autotrophic mode of feeding. In autotrophic mode of feeding, there is manufacture of food, which is usually glucose first, and the excess of the glucose is stored as glycogen. There are two types of autotrophic, which include holophytic, which is photosynthesis, and chemosynthesis. When you say chemosynthesis, this involves the use of energy from the environment. Unlike photosynthesis, we use energy from sunlight combined with carbon dioxide and water to form glucose. But in chemosynthesis, which is displayed by some other bacteria, they use chemical energy from their environment. In the case of plants, their feeding is in different ways. I will refer to that kind of feeding which involves taking in ready-made food as heterotrophic mode of feeding or heterotrophic nutrition. From the diagram, we can see the first thing, which is the mushroom. The mushroom undergoes saprophytic mode of feeding. Saprophytic mode of feeding. They release enzymes on their food substrate. They feed on dead organisms. When they release their enzymes on the dead organism, the enzymes will decay or digest this organism, and they absorb the digested materials into their body. And the one you can see is a plant, actually, is a pitcher plant. It can feed on insects. It makes when insects fall into the pitcher, the sac-like structure, they feed on the insect. And you can see the animal having, and that mode of feeding in the pitcher plant is called the carnivorous feeding in plants. And the squirrel you see is feeding on his own, on the ready-made food, and that one is called holozoic mode of feeding, ingesting direct solid. Let's quickly look at irritability. Irritability or sensitivity is the ability of organism to respond to a change in the environment, which can be simply said to be responding to change in stimulus. Plants, as you see in the diagram, when it sees water and condition that warmth, temperature, and oxygen, it germinates, meaning that plant seeds respond to all these factors, and they germinate and begins to change and to respond and be growing. That's sensitivity. This diagram is displaying two characteristics together. It is displaying the sensitivity and growth. An animal below is showing how the animals are responding to the cold temperature. The cold temperature is regarded as stimulus, or is a change in the environment. If you are feeling the pang of hunger, that's also a stimulus. If somebody switch off the light in your environment, that's a stimulus. A stimulus simply means a change in the environment, meaning that every living organism can respond to a change in environment. Let's look at the other characteristics, growth and excretion. Growth in biology means their ability to increase in size or the number of body cells and mass after feeding. Look at this. I described this diagram earlier, that in the diagram that you're seeing a seed growing is a permanent increase in size, length, and mass of plant seed. Then you see germination is a form of growth. The one seed is increasing in size, although the seed will decay and give rise to new cells, which continue to increase in size until the height, a mass is growth. Now the other one, which is showing this the cheek, we look at a growth as permanent increase in number of cells. It is so because when you look at a cheek simply looks like one cell of one cell of the organism, and it is changing inside it, reproducing more. The cell is reproducing more, dividing until a cheek is formed inside it, meaning that a growth occurs as your cell is dividing, splitting, and growing, and it until it becomes a permanent organism. Quick one. Let's look at excretion. Excretion simply means the ability to remove the metabolic waste from the body. Both carbon dioxide and oxygen are metabolic waste in plants. What am I saying here is that during photosynthesis, oxygen is a waste product. But during respiration for all organisms, the carbon dioxide is a waste product. So excretion is removing all this metabolic waste. And what do you mean by metabolic waste? A metabolic waste is the material that is produced during the building up reaction in the body or the breaking down reaction in the body. The building up reaction in the body can be known as anabolism, and a breaking down reaction in the body is catabolism. For example, photosynthesis is a building up reaction in which simple materials are combined together to form a large molecule, such as glucose. Then the respiration, as said, is a catabolic reaction where a big molecule like glucose is broken down by the use of oxygen. Take note here, student. Most students always confuse that plants respire. Plant respires by taking in oxygen, as every other organism do. Every other organism does that. They take in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. That is respiration. However, when there is sunlight, plant actively manufacture food, and that is when they produce carbon dioxide, and that's when they use carbon dioxide to produce glucose and release oxygen. The diagram below is showing how this bird, a marine bird, is removing excess salt of metabolism from its head. It has a gland that helps in the removal of that. And in us, we have kidney, which helps to remove excess water, excess salt, and excess urea in form of urine. Let's look at other characteristics of living things, such as respiration. Briefly, I had mentioned respiration before in the previous slide, and I said that respiration is the ability to produce energy through the breakdown of glucose, either in the presence of oxygen or in the absence of oxygen. When you take in oxygen, or organism takes in oxygen to break down glucose in the cell, that is called respiration. And after that, carbon dioxide, water, and energy is released. That is, plants also carry out this process. But plants carry out majorly during the time of light, the feeding process, which is they take in carbon dioxide. However, they do this together simultaneously because plants also respire and they also manufacture their food. As you can see below, these organisms below is showing the structures which they use to carry out gaseous exchange. How do they take in gas? Fish use their lungs to do this exchange of gas. Exchange of gas is important so that oxygen can get to the place, to the body cells where they can be used to break down the glucose. That is catabolic process I said earlier. The lungs is in other animals. Then in insect, they have what we call tracheal system. They use tracheal system for gaseous exchange. And the other characteristics of living thing which I'm going to mention is lifespan. Lifespan, all organism has time of birth, and when that is when activities begin, all the living activities begin, and the time of death when all living activities will cease to occur. It means that only a living thing can have a beginning, and we surely have the time that the ability to do all these living characters will cease to occur. As we see in the diagram, that's a maize. A maize, the time of a life of maize is when it is a seed. When you bring a seed and you plant it, it germinates. So it begins to grow until it gets to the final one. And in the final stage, it produces another seed, and the old one would die after plucking off the newly produced leaf. That is the lifespan. And we can see in the housefly below, every living organism have what we call life cycle, which is also known as lifespan. And the next two characteristics I will discuss are adaptation and competition. When we look at adaptation, we are looking at the ability of organisms to develop a structure, function, and behavior in order to survive in a particular environment. For instance, as you are seeing in the diagram, we have this plant, that's a cactus, that the birds are taking their place on it. The plant has spiny leaves. This helps them to survive in a dry environment, and the structure helps them to minimize what we call transpiration or loss of water. And the bird's legs are adapted to find their way to take their rest on it. And below it is a leaf looking like insect. The insect is there, but it has a leaf-like structure, which makes it to look like a leaf to their predators. They are doing this so that they will not be eaten by their potential predators, and they use this to survive. And that's what we call adaptation. Adaptation is the ability to develop structure, function, and behavior in order to survive in a particular environment. Let's look at competition. Competition, this is the ability of organisms to struggle to acquire limited resources. A competition is when you put two things and you ask 5 people to go and share them. It means the strongest one will get it, and those weak ones will not get it. And that's what we call competition. It's only a living thing that has ability to compete for the limited resources. Looking at this, the diagram is showing the lion feeding, and the hyenas are surrounding the lion. If the lions are not careful, the hyenas will take over the meat, because there is no available meat to satisfy all of them at that point in time. And the two of them struggling for the resources is known as competition. So in the plant below, plants do compete. The tall ones will have more access to sunlight, and those small ones will be competing, but if they cannot survive, they will die. And that is why we see some plants that are not big, but they are growing on another plant and near the top of the tree. And such plants that grow on top of another tree, though they are not parasites, they are just epiphytes. Epiphyte because they grow on another plant so that they can have direct access to sunlight, and that is also showing a form of competition. So what do plants struggle to get? They struggle to get light for water. They struggle to get space too. And finally today, there is one controversial organism I would quickly discuss, and that organism is known as virus. So the virus is neither a cell, a living organism, nor a non-living organism. Why is it a non-living organism? It is a non-living organism because if virus is left alone and it's not in the body of the any non-living organism, it will remain like that for life. However, it is the smallest cell, and virus can be a living organism if it should get into the appropriate cell body, a living organism, where it would begin to replicate itself. And it does this by using the factor or the materials from the body of the host cell to reproduce more of its cell. It seizes all the machinery in the body of the host cell and uses it to multiply itself. And when they multiply themselves, they begin to affect the body of the host. And they are known as obligate parasite. They are parasites that only live and survive inside the body of the host cell. Now, what can we say about virus? Virus is just a kind of small cell, and the structure we can find it includes the protein coats, which you can see in the diagram, and it has either the genetic material, which is either the DNA or RNA, and this the genetic material is what they reproduce more in the host cell body. And because of this, virus is a controversial organism. because when it is left on the table, it will look like a pen or a bottle that you have left on the table, which will remain. But it gets to behave like a living organism when it comes into the body of a living cell. And here I have come to the end of the characteristics of living things. As I said earlier, use all these characteristics stated to differentiate between a living thing and non-living thing. Thank you again for listening to this lesson, and see you in another class. God bless you. I still remain Jegede Olushola Temitope. See you in my next class. Goodbye.